He's been called California's most innovative leader, a bold fighter and a champion of equality. Unfortunately, he flaked this evening. I'm speaking about Assemblyman Gray Davis. But in Assemblyman Gray Davis's spot, Beverly's own Ramsey Salem, and from Harvard, Jim Deutsch. Tonight we'll be discussing the Strategic Defense Initiative and the United States' viability in a nuclear confrontation. I'd like to start off by asking either one of you your feelings on SDI. Is it viable?
I think SDI is very viable. 10 years before we landed on the moon, who would have thought that was ever possible? I mean, I have great faith in our scientists in this country, and I believe they will be able to do whatever is necessary to defend this country.
I mean, 10 years ago when, as you spoke, 10 years before we landed on the moon, the President came out with his quest, a vision, so to speak, that the United States would beat the Soviet Union, that we would be the first to land on the moon. And on March 23rd, 1983, our President came out to speak, and he spoke about a safer world. A world no longer held hostage by the threat of a nuclear holocaust. Strategic Defense Initiative. Jim, do you think that nuclear war can be winnable?
Well, you know, when you say winnable, I think you definitely can mean survivable, because in an all-out nuclear attack, I do believe that a great number of our citizens in the United States will be able to survive an attack by the Soviet Union, and of course continue to support democracy in this world. And I definitely think it is survivable and, of course, winnable.
Do we accept the words from our politicians, the words from our leaders saying acceptable losses? Do they really exist, Jim?
I do believe they do, Richard, and I think that our country is being the strongest country in the world. I feel that with SDI and with the kind of precautions that we are taking, we will of course be able to survive an attack of nuclear proportions.
Okay. Ramsey,
Yes.
Do you share the same view from Jim?
Well, I hope to God we never have to find out whether nuclear war is winnable, and it's one of the reasons I have great faith in Star Wars and hope that the technology can be developed so this world will be made safer. I think we have to look over the fact that it's just not the Soviet Union and the United States who have nuclear weapons. The possibilities of a third world country, an unstable government, achieving the ability to launch a nuclear warhead or being able to develop nuclear technology is horrifying, and that's where I think a Strategic Defense Initiative has its most valuable assets.
Now, some people go along with the argument that our world's been safe for the past 40 years, a full generation. There has been no more world wars because of nuclear weapons. If we're going to make these weapons obsolete, will we be destroying the peace that we've had?
Well, that's going under the statement that just the Soviet Union and America have these nuclear weapons. What I'm worried about is a Muammar Gaddafi getting his hands on these weapons, or a currently stable government that might have a revolution and those weapons falling into the hands of unstable people.
What about such a confrontation between India and Pakistan? We know they're longtime rivals. Pakistan has been claimed to have nuclear weapons, and India has been getting quite an amount of support and aid from the Soviet Union. Do we see a possibility there, a threat?
That's exactly where the threat generates from. Countries like that, third world countries who are not stable, who have rivalries, and who may be willing to use it in case of war, an event.
Jim, when you mentioned the industry, what do you feel could come out of SDI, not only militarily speaking, but economically speaking?
Well, definitely economically, our country is in a situation where many millions of people can be employed in industries relating to and in defense contracting.
Right.
Aerospace, Boeing, for instance, developing many technologies for use in these kind of systems. It's just I also agree with Ramsey in the fact that our country and the Soviet Union have a great deal to lose in the event of a nuclear war. I think that the possibility of war between our two countries is less than the possibility of a third country, such as Pakistan, China.
But getting back to the original question, winning a nuclear war.
Well, yes.
Is it feasible?
I do think that it's feasible.
Okay. In which aspect?
In the aspect that we would survive. But I don't think, who can you call a winner in a nuclear war? I mean, in the event of a nuclear war, I'd say both sides would definitely be involved. Losses would be in the millions on both sides. It's survivable. Winnable, I mean, how do you define winnable? I mean, I don't think that we can
Wouldn't that
consider...
be more or less saying that, coming back to the idea of acceptable losses, that if the Soviet Union loses, say, 120 million people, and the United States loses,
Well-
say, 50 million people, and therefore, with those numbers and the checks and balances, that the United States will come out a winner?
Well, I mean, when we lose the number of people we lost in Vietnam, I mean, we've taken that as quite a loss. I mean,
I would hardly equate Vietnam.
No, but I'd say that 50 million people would be quite a number. I mean, even 100 million, even 10 million people would be quite a loss. I mean, the kind of lives that would be lost in a nuclear war would greatly be more
Right.
than any losses and any battles that have ever occurred in history. It's just an awesome force, and I think that through Star Wars or
You believe
SDI,
we can curtail the growth? and-
definitely, I think that we'll be heading toward a more defense-oriented defense rather than an offensively oriented defense. We're not going to be building missiles to destroy
now, the
people.
Soviet Union, they say that with us having SDI, we can use it as an offensive weapon. How do you feel about these claims from the evil empire?
Well, looking at it pragmatically, if we can destroy the Soviet Union and they can't destroy us, obviously SDI does become an offensive weapon. Like I said earlier, I don't think that SDI would be used primarily against the Soviets. There's a great fear among third world countries, which, who may possess these nuclear weapons and would be willing to destroy the word. One nuclear bomb could start off a nuclear war and, place in a proper spot. And that's where I have a great fear of. With nuclear war being winnable, that's a entirely different matter. Like I said, I'd hope to God we never find out. I mean, technically it may be, but morally, 50 million, 75 million people dead is just unacceptable.
But if we're doing to uphold democracy in the free world?
There's other effects of nuclear war which we may not be contemplating right here. I mean, nuclear winter, the greenhouse effect, all those have
But
to
that's
be
never
decided.
been, they've never found that conclusive. That they say perhaps the nuclear winter could last 6 months. Now, sure, that will have an effect on the crops, but we have such a surplus at this point. The silos are filled with grain, with the wheat. We have strategic reserves, petroleum, up to 5-year supply. Now, how could a 6-month period possibly endanger the United States?
Well, Rick, I mean, I'd like to interject something in here. I feel that this type of a conflict. I mean, would you enjoy living in a world with
It's not
with
a
endless nights with
I think it's
nuclear
more of a
rain pouring
point.
down on you?
I think what we're talking about here is the point that if the Soviet Union and the West and the Warsaw Pact move west into Western Europe, and the NATO alliance has their doctrine that if they do so, they will use neutron bombs to stop them, obviously. Now, people believe that could create an escalation, but even if it does, mustn't we do something to protect ourselves against the communism?
Well, SDI is in effect doing that. SDI is
Right.
in effect protecting us from an offensive attack by any country,
But
not
at a
just the
time,
Soviet Union possessing
Jim,
nuclear
we're
weapons.
facing deficits of over $200 billion. The 99th Congress just got out, and we see that our national debt is $2.6 trillion. Now, the president wants to spend $50 billion in the next 10 years on this. Where's the money coming from? He's cutting, the president and administration cuts taxes. Now, I'm not saying the administration is increasing spending, Congress is. But where's this money going to come from?
Well, Rick, it's going to have to come. It's going to have to come from possibly a tax increase. I know we don't like to talk about this, but it's always a possibility. Money cannot just. I mean, just does not simply appear, and we just cannot continue to print it up when we need it. Rick, money comes in the form. Our government generates revenue in the form of taxes, in the form of tariffs collected. There are many. Rick,
Well, it's easy to say, but Ramsey?
I think our current fiscal policies are going to create enough jobs and give business such a fundamental base that they'll be able to solve the debt. I have great faith in American business and the ingenuity of the American people.
Won't that leave us with an industry? Some people believe it would be a $20 trillion a year industry. I mean, doesn't that far outweigh any benefits, even if it doesn't work militarily, to build it and to spend the money for the economic benefits down the line, 10, 20 years?
Well, I mean, you could say that, but you could also use the money to improve the way our country looks, not necessarily build.
So which way are we going, Jim? We're either pro-SDI or we're against.
Well, Rick, we are pro it, but what you were saying is that the money. You're generally saying the money's not going to be used towards towards an effective system. I
No,
think that it
I'm
will
just
be.
asking where the money is coming from. I mean, are we going to have to raise taxes like you suggest? Can we go with tax reform? Will that do it?
I don't have the greatest faith in the current tax policies initiated by the 99th Congress. I think what's going to eventually solve this is once we have total and complete free enterprise in this world, when the substantial amounts of money aren't needed to be spent on defense. We cannot currently go on spending this much money on defense. There has to be some solution, some outcome.
But even when the Soviets are spending over $500 billion a year more than us, I mean, where's it going to end?
It's just going to have to end. I think, I mean, we have conflicting beliefs. Our belief is in a capitalist system. Their belief is in one of communism, in one where the society is regulated so the people work for the benefit of the government. I feel that if our policies are to meet in the middle and for world benefit, I think that we're going to have to compromise. I mean, our system to us is the best in the world. Theirs to them, theirs, of course, to their people is, you know, possibly the best too. So I feel that a balance would, you know, we could stimulate a world. It would be a global economy, including the Soviet Union.
But where would that leave? Now, how would we get the United States involved there?
Well, Rick, I mean, you know, steps would have to be taken. I mean, if you're talking about an economic,
Right, exactly.
a world economic policy, then, you know, we'd have to have leaders from the respective countries would have to meet and you know, they'd organize something of this effect. But I mean, right now we're having meetings discussing nuclear weapons and where they're placing and who's afraid of what. I mean, I think, you know, there are many hurdles to get over before we get to that kind of a point.
How would you summarize your feelings on the Strategic Defense Initiative?
I'm without a doubt advocate support of the Strategic Defense Initiative because I feel it represents a hope. The current situation the world's in right now is pointing towards Armageddon, nuclear war. I mean, the arguments are just building up and one day it might break. You know, never know how tolerant these two countries are going to be. I think Strategic Defense Initiative represents a hope, and I think we should pursue it with all means possible.
Do you agree with the President with sharing the technology we get with the Soviets?
I don't believe in sharing technology or anything else with the Soviets, which in turn they could come back and harm us with. No, I would not share the technology with the Soviets.
And Jim?
Well, I feel that the Soviets have not been in the past reliable partners with us, and they definitely should not be entitled to be sharing our secrets. I mean, I think that we first, as you noticed in the Iceland summit meetings, how Premier Gorbachev really, you know, regarded the power of SDI and recognized it in effect by saying that he would reduce the number of missiles that the Soviets have if we would in effect halt Star Wars testing. And I mean, I really see that gives us a perspective on how Star Wars is viewed throughout the world, and especially in the Soviet Union. It's viewed as a power to be reckoned with. And I feel that we have that as an effective card that we can play with.
Great. Well, let's move on a little bit. Elections are 3 weeks away. See Ed Schau, Alan Cranston, George Duke Majan, Bradley, the controller's race, which has been heating up quite a bit with Gray Davis and Bill Campbell. We see the proposition, 64 aides. Pick any one of them, Ramsey.
Currently, we must keep the Senate. The Republican Party must hold on to the Senate. The United States is going to continue on with its economic prosperity. I think the voters will realize this, and because of it, will vote for the Team 86 and choose the Republican candidates and the issues which are not going to raise taxes. It's unpopular with the voters. You don't raise taxes in this day and age.
What about a continual, supposing what would happen if, God forbid, the Senate loses and the Democrats take the Senate? How do you see the Democratic Party coming up in 1988?
God forbid is correct
Right.
in that matter. Well, I don't have great faith in the Democratic Party. I think they've led us to ruin many times in our past, and I don't think that's going to happen. I think the voters are going to go with the Republican because it's what's paying off. They're going to look at their pocketbook and see the Republican policies as what's making it fatter. And that's what's going to decide the votes.
Jim?
Well, speaking about Proposition 64, I think that, you know, since that is coming up on the November ballot, the referendum, which would in effect quarantine any
the LaRouche
people,
Initiative.
the LaRouche Initiative, which would quarantine those who are suspected of or who are believed to have AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome. I just feel that this kind of a referendum, I mean, is really going way
Reckless.
overboard. I think that LaRouche, who many of us know was quite a outspoken and quite a right wing.
I think that's putting it mild.
I think so, but his policies are really they're not in my favor, and I really feel that this AIDS initiative is it's taking this too far. I mean, I think that for
Where do we
evidence now
stop it,
that
though?
AIDS,
Where do we stop AIDS? We see it spreading. We see blood transfusions.
it's basically in the people, Rick. I think that since it
through
is
education.
I think education is one way. I also think that spreading out the way we deal with this problem. I mean, we're dealing it right now on a smaller level than I think we should be. I think we should be greatly expanding it, even though it is right now in the news, and is quite in fashion to support this kind of a thing. But I think that AIDS is a problem that in the future, in the next 10 years, could escalate to something of Black Plague proportions. It could be the next plague. And even though we have evidence to say it is not transmitted by casual contact, people have taken the scare, and they've really taken it to heart, and it's getting quite out of hand, I think.
Ramsey?
I definitely think one of the ways to solve the AIDS problem is to restrict the people who are spreading it. With Prop 64, Lyndon LaRouche is a tumor on the political process. Right now he may be hurting the Democratic Party, tomorrow he might turn around and hurt the Republican Party. The two parties must unite to destroy this tumor before it cancers and spread out. Lyndon LaRouche should be eliminated along with all his bills.
Now, we see that Mr. LaRouche himself, 20 years ago he was a communist, and now he's a fascist. They're closing...
Lyndon LaRouche and all his followers happen to run on the Democratic ticket. I don't know what side you would put him in. He's a flip-flopper, and I wouldn't categorize him in any department.
Another hot proposition, Prop 63, the English initiative. It would take or mandate that English would be the official language of California. Spanish wouldn't be on the ballots. Anything else? Feelings?
I think that language is one of the largest barriers to assimilation among peoples. If the Latino populations and other minorities wish to assimilate into the American culture, I find they're going to have to learn the language. And Prop 63 is one way to encourage them to learn it.
Jim?
Well, I think that's true, but it's also, we're living in an English society. We're living in a place where to work in the job, to be a part of the job force, English is required as a required tool, and I think that education of these people is definitely a way to kind of spread this around. I mean, I think that we should be forced. I think that people coming into this country they must be forced. I mean, if they're not going to learn the language by themselves, their job might force them to. So, I mean...
Doesn't that get us down to a larger issue, the one of immigration? Immigration bill passed last week. It gives citizenship to these people who cross the borders illegally with vagrant disregard to any laws. Personally, I believe it's a travesty. Opinions?
Well, I think that, excuse me, Ramsey, I think that this kind of a bill, I mean, it's feasible only because we just can't contain. I mean, there have been so many people that have infiltrated our borders in the past 10, in the past years, and there's nothing we can do.
You want to give them citizenship?
There's nothing, Rick, I mean, we can't go around door to door checking for identification and passports and green cards. It's not economically feasible with the cutbacks in the government.
Funding towards INS.
Definitely. I think we should.
That's something we can do.
Well, I think right now the problem in the present is that we go out and deal with the problem of people crossing into our country illegally.
So all we do is we say that, you can cross over our borders, and 8 years down the line, we're going to give you citizenship?
No, Rick,
Isn't that encouraging?
I think that it's from the previous 8 years and not into the future. I think that right now, if we deal with building up our borders, deal with protecting our borders from foreign infiltration.
So why? Granted, you want to do that, and I don't know anyone that wouldn't.
Right.
Why would you want to give citizenship to these people that have crossed over illegally? They don't have jobs. They're going to go on unemployment, on welfare. Now we're going to have to pay a minimum wage.
You can't say that about everyone, Rick. I mean, there are many people, I'm sure, who over the years have come into this country and have become productive workers in their respective fields. But I think that we just can't go around headhunting for people who don't have green cards, who don't have citizenship papers. I mean, there has to be a line that we set. I mean, you just can't say that one day you're a citizen, the next day you're not. I think we have to have a boundary, and in the past, we've been slacking off in our borders.
Maintain it.
Right. We must maintain right now in the present.
The question I would like to ask is, what is the problem with immigration? Is it a problem with the aliens coming over our borders? I think we're going to have to focus on the larger problem in the future if we really want to solve this. and find out why they're coming across our borders. We must find peace and stability in Mexico and Central America. That's the problem. Why these people want to leave. We have to make it so they won't want to come here, where they can achieve economic prosperity at home without having to come here.
How can we be working on problems in Latin America and in Mexico when we've got our own problems here? I think that
What are you going to write off all Latin Central America?
I'm not going to say that. I'm just saying that this kind of a problem is. I think a lot of people come over to this country thinking that it's the promised land, that they're going to have a job, that they're going to have a big house,
I think
a car.
we should make their home the promised land. Give them the chance to achieve it at home.
But what about dealing with the bill that was just passed? Do you agree with giving them citizenship?
I was very pro guest worker program myself.
That wasn't passed.
Unfortunately, no. I don't completely like the idea of giving citizenship to all these aliens, because I think it's unfair to many of the other people trying to come into this country from other nations. I think it's going to solve the problem short-termly, but the problem's still going to exist in another 3-4 years when we're confronted with it again. This problem just delayed it. It didn't solve the problem.
Well, by giving them citizenship now, the ones that are working on our fields will become citizens, and we're going to have to pay a minimum wage. We're going to see a drastic increase in our prices. They're going to want health benefits.
Drastic decline in the agriculture business of California and other states.
So how do we contend with that?
It's a very controversial issue. I think we're going to have to one day focus on the real problem. And the real problem is, why are these people having to come to this country?
How do you propose to deal with it? How do you propose to make Mexico and all of Central America the land of opportunity?
Well, maybe if Daniel Ortega moved out of Managua, that might solve one of our problems.
Don't you mean the Russians, the Soviet Union, Cuba?
I'm talking from Moscow to Havana and then to Managua. We're going to have to solve it from there. Sandinista is disrupting all of Central America. We're going to have to form free enterprise there, and you can't do it with one country threatening the others.
Yeah.
That's where the problem lies.
Well, I think in our past attempts to deal with this kind of a problem, with communism in a Latin American, in those kind of countries such as Cuba, I think our attempts have been not as admirable as we would have liked them to be. But I think that dealing with this problem right now is the fact that Latin America and Central America are very debt-ridden, are very, due to the declining price of oil, which was Mexico's one of their sole sources of income, is really a problem that we in our country also have to deal with too. I just think that the default of the loans by Latin and Central America has really hurt our banks, especially Bank of America, now that they're.
But shouldn't the bankers back in '79, '80 realize that yes, oil is at $25 a barrel, $30 a barrel, and not with that just haste of the moment think what's going to happen 10 years down the line?
I mean, I don't think they thought that these kind of drastic price deflations would occur. I mean, oil this cheap hasn't been seen since the early '70s, since before the oil embargo, and I just think that it was something that was unforeseen. But I mean, I don't think our bankers should have been so slap happy to go run off to Central America and Brazil and Latin America and loan them billions of dollars. I mean, it's caused us a great
Fiscal
deal of problems.
restraint.
By whom? Who's going to enforce it? Or where's it going to come from?
The administration and the business people lend this money to these countries. You have to.
Now that we've lent it to them, and now that they can't pay it back, where do we go?
We're going to have to solve those problems. Problems of corruption.
Well, how do we solve them?
It's take more than the time on the show allows, but we're going to have to look into them very deeply, and we're going to have to find some way where these countries aren't going to need to come to the United States for help. We have to make them economically independent.
And that's why we're looking for the Republican ticket, because
Absolutely.
That's what they're trying to do.
The policies of the Carter administration obviously devastated this nation before, and if another Democratic administration comes in, they're going to devastate it again.
True. It's a quick summary. The general elections, where do you think the Senate's going to go, Jim?
Well, I think the Republicans probably will have a good chance of holding on to a majority in the Senate. I think that it's going to be a tough battle, but due to the popularity of Ronald Reagan and other Republicans, I think that the Republicans should definitely hold on to the Senate, although I don't know that they'll be able to.
What about on the state level? Governor?
I definitely, in our state, I definitely think our governor is the #1 candidate. Tom Bradley is, first of all, he's not the kind of leader we need for a state. I mean, he's a city official. He's not a state official, Rick. And I think that George Duke Machen has proved himself in the past, and is quite capable of running our state, making our state a profitable one, and just I think we should, elect George to make it our next governor.
Great. Ramsey?
Well, I think the voters are going to ask themselves on November 4th, have I prospered in the last 6 years? And I think that answer is going to be yes, and that's going to affect their vote. They're going to vote for the Republican candidates on their ballots.
I believe all across the board, not just for United
Well,
States Senate. Just
in
straight down
California, Cranston's a remnant of the past. A new era has dawned on this country, and he's out of date with it. Show's a momentum. He's a free enterpriser. People will respect that. The Duke Majan has proven himself in the last 4 years. He'll
True.
prove himself again. Tom Bradley just,
to, won't make
he
it.
doesn't have the
So we hear
people
it here
support.
live on Under Fire. It's going to go Republican in the Senate. The state's going to go Republican, and this nation's going to continue to forge ahead
And the world.
undauntedly. I'd like to thank you very much, Ramsey, Jim.
Thank you.
We'll do it again.
Thank you, Rick.
So I guess down the line we look more or less in '88 for Republican presidency.
Of course.
Dole,
92.
Baker, Hill.
Could spell the end of the Democratic Party.
It's quite a sweeping assumption to make, Ramsey.
Hmm?
It's quite a sweeping assumption to.
Well, the
Insinuate.
successes of the Republican Party and the failures of the Democrat by electing Jimmy Carter and Walter Mondale
It's
have
true. They were
all
quite a
but
dismal team. They did.
covered the grave.
Great. All right. Well, we'll do
Thank
this
you very
sometime in
much.
the future.
Okay.
I guess that's just about it for right